The small town of Raymore was known for its wealthy families, high-walled mansions, and the silent struggles of the poor who worked behind those golden gates. Among the poorest of them all was Salma, a young girl whose life was defined by the shadow of her mother's work. Her mother, Aisha, was a maid who had spent her entire life cleaning the very houses that looked down upon her. From childhood, Salma carried the burden of mockery. Children from rich families whispered insults at school. "There goes the maid's daughter," they laughed, their words sharp like knives. Salma's school uniform was often patched and faded, a painful reminder that her life could never mirror theirs. She would sit quietly in class, hiding her hands under the desk so no one noticed her cracked fingers from helping her mother wash clothes late into the night. But what hurt her most was not the laughter of the rich. It was the silence of those who could have defended her. Even her teachers ignored the bullying, believing that a maid's daughter didn't deserve to stand beside children of businessmen, landlords, and officials. Every day, Salma carried this shame back home, her small feet heavy with invisible chains. At night, however, Aisha would hold her daughter close and whisper, "You are not just my daughter, Salma. You are born for something greater. Remember, stars shine brightest in the darkest skies." These words were the fuel that kept Salma's heart alive. While others mocked her, she buried herself in books. She borrowed old torn novels from the school library, studied mathematics under the weak glow of a kerosene lamp, and memorized English words by writing them on scraps of used paper. Her mind was her secret weapon, her education the sword she sharpened in silence. Still, reality was cruel. When her classmates celebrated birthdays with cakes and balloons, Salma spent evenings scrawling, ubbing dishes in other people's kitchens. When others arrived in cars, she walked barefoot down dusty roads. One rainy evening, she overheard two wealthy women whispering, "Look at her. She thinks she can study like our children. In the end, she will also clean floors like her mother." Those words burned in her memory, but instead of breaking her, they became her vow. That night, standing by the flickering lamp, she promised herself, "One day they will not see a maid's daughter. They will see Salma, the girl who rose beyond their world." Yet destiny tested her harder. At just 15, tragedy struck. Aisha fell sick, her back bent from years of labor, her lungs weakened by dust and chemicals. The doctor said she could no longer work. With her mother bedridden, Salma became both the caretaker and the breadwinner. She worked in the same houses where she was once ridiculed, wiping the floors under the feet of girls who used to mock her in school. But unlike her mother, Salma had something more, knowledge and dreams. Every night after work, she would still study, her tired hands trembling as she turned each page. Her eyes would burn, but she refused to surrender. She believed every painful hour was a step toward freedom. The town, however, laughed louder. Rich families used her story as entertainment. See, even with her big dreams, she ended up as a maid like her mother. But deep inside, Salma knew her journey had just begun. The chains of humiliation had forged a fire in her heart. She was ready to prove that the daughter of a maid could stand on a stage far higher than those who once looked down on her. And so with each insult she swallowed, with each tear she buried, Salma carved a path invisible to all, but destined to change her life forever. The summer of Salma's 16th year arrived heavy with dust and despair. Her mother's illness grew worse, and the medicines drained what little money they had. Some nights, Salma skipped meals so her mother could eat. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she swallowed it like she swallowed every insult, silently with a clenched jaw. Yet even in that darkness, fate whispered to her in the form of a small opportunity. One evening, while she was cleaning dishes at the mansion of Mr. Hamid, a wealthy businessman, she noticed his son struggling with his homework. The boy frowned at the textbook, frustrated, while his father shouted from the other room. Salma hesitated, but courage pushed her forward. "If you want, I can help him," she said softly. At first, Hamid's wife laughed. "You? A maid's daughter teaching our son? That's amusing." But the boy himself pleaded, "Let her try, Mama." With trembling hands, Salma sat down beside him. She explained the math problem in simple words, drawing tiny diagrams on a scrap of paper. To everyone's surprise, the boy's eyes lit up with understanding. He solved the problem within minutes. From that day on, Salma began tutoring him in secret. She was not paid, of course. Maids didn't deserve such luxuries. But every lesson strengthened her confidence. Word spread quietly among the servants. "That maid's daughter is clever. She could teach better than some schoolmasters." But this fragile spark of hope was tested quickly. At school, the bullying worsened. One afternoon during recess, a group of wealthy girls cornered her. One sneered, "Why do you even study, Salma? You'll always smell like detergent and cheap soap." Another girl added cruelly, "Even if you pass, no college will take someone like you." Salma walked away, her fists clenched, their laughter echoing behind her. She didn't reply, not because she had no answer, but because shucks. He was saving her energy for something bigger. At night, when her mother coughed weakly beside her, Salma whispered her dreams aloud. "Ami, one day I will study at the best university. I will become someone whose name people respect. You will no longer be just a maid. They will know you as the mother of Salma." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "My daughter, promise me something. When that day comes, never forget where you came from. Never forget the pain that made you strong." Salma nodded, sealing the vow in her heart. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A teacher at her school, Miss Nadia, had quietly observed Salma's dedication. She noticed how Salma borrowed old books, how her assignments were always neat, how her answers in class often surpassed even the wealthiest students. One day, after class, Miss Nadia called her. "Salma, have you ever thought about applying for a scholarship?" Salma's heart stopped. She had heard the word before, but never believed it could belong to her world. "Scholarship? But those are for people who can afford to dream," she whispered. Miss Nadia smiled gently. "No, they are for people who work hard enough to deserve them. And you, Salma, are exactly that kind of person." Hope flooded through her veins like sunlight breaking into a dark room. For the first time, she realized she had a weapon stronger than her poverty, her determination and her knowledge. That night, she filled out the scholarship form with trembling hands, praying over every word she wrote. She had no fancy references, no polished recommendation letters. All she had was her story, raw, painful, and true. She poured her heart onto the paper, the struggles of being a maid's daughter, the nights she studied under a dim lamp, the insults she endured, and the fire that kept her alive. It wasn't just an application, it was her declaration of war against fate. And while the world still mocked her, calling her dreams impossible, Salma was quietly planting the seeds of a future that would shock them all. She didn't know it yet, but the storm she had endured, the weeks after submitting the scholarship application were some of the hardest of Salma's life. Every day felt like walking on a knife's edge, uncertain, painful, and sharp with fear. She would check the school notice board 3 times a day, her eyes scanning desperately for her name, but the results were always coming soon. Meanwhile, the cruelty around her only deepened. The wealthy students caught wind of her ambition, and they made it their new sport. One morning, when she walked into class, she found the words, "Maid's daughter, stay in the kitchen," scribbled across her desk in black marker. Laughter rippled through the classroom as she stood frozen, staring at the cruel graffiti. Her heart throbbed painfully, but instead of erasing the words, she placed her notebook directly over them and sat down. In that moment, she realized something important. Their insults were not walls, they were fuel. Every attempt to break her only added to the fire inside. At home, however, things were no better. Her mother's health took a dangerous turn, medicines were too expensive, and some nights Salma had to choose between buying her mother's pills or her own school books. More than once, she chose the pills and borrowed old torn notebooks from other students. She patched them together with string, writing neatly on yellowed pages as if they were brand new. The stress became unbearable. One night, after her mother fell asleep, Salma sat alone in the dim light of their small lamp. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered into the silence, "Ya Allah, am I chasing a dream too big for me? Maybe they're right. Maybe girls like me don't belong in universities." But then she remembered her mother's words, "Never forget the pain that made you strong." Salma wiped her tears and opened her book again. If her life was a battlefield, then her knowledge would be her sword. Finally, the day of the scholarship exam arrived. It was a bright, scorching afternoon, the kind where even the air seemed heavy. Salma walked into the examination hall with nothing but an old pen, a borrowed ruler, and the weight of her entire future pressing on her shoulders. The wealthy students arrived in polished shoes and expensive watches, their parents waiting outside in shiny cars. Salma arrived alone, her sandals worn and her clothes plain, but her determination outshone them all. When the exam papers were handed out, her hands trembled for a moment. Then, As her eyes scanned the first question, her fear melted away. Every late night, every whispered lesson to herself, every page of borrowed books came alive in her mind. She wrote with a steady hand, her answers flowing like a river breaking through stone. Around her, students groaned and scratched their heads, but Salma pressed on. Her heart beat faster with every completed answer. She knew this was not just a test, it was her battle for dignity. Hours later, when the papers were collected, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but strangely peaceful. She had given her all, and that was enough. Weeks passed again, heavy with waiting. Then one afternoon, as she was scrubbing the floor of Hamid's mansion, a servant burst into the room. "Salma, the school board has announced the results. Your name is there." Her heart nearly stopped. She dropped the rag and ran, her feet flying over the dusty roads until she reached the notice board outside school. Her eyes searched frantically, and then she saw it. Her name, Salma Bano, full scholarship awarded. The world blurred around her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from triumph. In that moment, every insult, every hunger pang, every sleepless night turned into a badge of victory. But victory did not come quietly. As she stood there, students whispered behind her. Some scoffed. Others looked at her with a mix of jealousy and disbelief. The girl they had mocked as a maid's daughter was now stepping into a future brighter than their. The scholarship opened doors Salma never imagined possible. For the first time in her life, she walked into a place where her uniform wasn't patched and her books weren't borrowed. The university campus was vast, with tall buildings, bright lecture halls, and libraries filled with thousands of books that smelled of knowledge and promise. But while the surroundings had changed, the whispers followed her like shadows. Some students from wealthy backgrounds sneered, "Isn't that the maid's daughter who got in through pity?" Others dismissed her success as luck. Salma ignored them. She had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than arguments. Instead, she poured every ounce of her energy into her studies. Her days were long, lectures, library hours, assignments, and her nights were even longer, filled with tutoring sessions to earn a little extra money for her mother's treatment. Despite the workload, she began to shine. Her professors noticed her sharp mind and determination. One of them, Professor Ahmed, even said in class, "Salma, your analysis of this theory is beyond your years. You think not only like a student, but like a future scholar." Her classmates slowly began to shift their views. Some who had mocked her now approached her with questions. "Salma, can you help me with this assignment?" "Salma, how do you understand these concepts so quickly?" Every time she helped them, a part of her heart whispered, "This is my revenge, not through anger, but through success." Back at home, her mother's condition remained fragile, but her eyes glowed with pride whenever Salma returned with good news. "You are carrying both our dreams now," she would say, holding Salma's hand weakly. But fate, as always, tested her. One semester, just as exams were nearing, her mother collapsed. The doctor shook his head gravely. "She needs better treatment, more than what she's receiving." Salma was torn. She couldn't afford private care. For a moment, despair threatened to crush her. But then she remembered the countless nights she had survived without food, the humiliation she had endured in silence. She wasn't the type to surrender. She doubled her tutoring hours, sacrificing sleep and comfort. She studied during the day and worked at night, sometimes returning home just before dawn. Her body grew weaker, but her spirit refused to bend. On exam day, her face was pale, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Yet when she sat in the hall, she forced herself to focus. She had fought too hard to give up now. When results came, she didn't just pass, she topped her class. Her professors applauded her, and for the first time, the whispers of mockery were replaced by murmurs of respect. One student, who once laughed at her torn shoes, approached her and said softly, "Salma, I was wrong about you. You deserve everything you've achieved." But the greatest moment came when she returned home clutching her report card. She knelt beside her mother's bed and whispered, "Ami, I did it. I came first." Her mother's frail hands touched her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My daughter, you've turned our pain into power. You are proof that poverty cannot chain a strong heart." Salma held her tightly, promising herself she would climb higher, not just for her own sake, but for her mother, for every insult they had swallowed, and for every girl told she didn't belong. This was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation. And Salma was ready to rise beyond the limits the world had set for her. Years passed, and Salma's journey became a story whispered across campus, then across the city. The maid's daughter who once scrubbed floors now walked with a stack of books in her arms, a scholarship badge pinned proudly to her bag, and a determination in her eyes that even the harshest critics couldn't deny. By her final year at university, Salma was no longer just a student. She was a leader. She organized study circles for struggling classmates, spoke at seminars about education for underprivileged children, and even started a small initiative to provide free tutoring for girls from poor neighborhoods. The same girl who once borrowed torn notebooks now handed out free ones to others. But success did not erase her scars. Late at night, when the applause of the day faded, she would still remember the laughter of the girls who had mocked her, the hunger that had burned her stomach, and the sight of her mother working herself sick. These memories never left her, but instead of breaking her, they became the fuel that kept her pushing forward. Her biggest test came at graduation. On that bright afternoon, she stood among hundreds of students, all dressed in black gowns and caps. The air buzzed with excitement. Families cheered, cameras flashed, and proud parents called out their children's names. When Salma's name was announced, top student of the year, awarded with honors, Salma Bano, the auditorium erupted in applause. She walked across the stage, her steps steady, her chin lifted. As she accepted her medal, her eyes scanned the crowd until they found her mother, frail but smiling, tears glistening on her cheeks. That moment was more than a victory. It was a rebirth. After graduation, Salma's story spread further. Local newspapers wrote about her rise, calling her the maid's daughter who defied destiny. She was offered a position at a prestigious firm with a salary that could finally lift her mother out of poverty. One day, as fate would have it, she crossed paths with one of her old tormentors, the girl who had once written insults on her school desk. That girl, now working a modest job, looked at Salma with wide eyes. You're the one in the paper, aren't you? The maid's daughter who became a top graduate? Salma didn't smile arrogantly or throw back the insults she once endured. She simply replied, yes, that's me. And I hope one day you'll understand that mocking someone's beginnings never changes where they can end up. The girl lowered her gaze, ashamed. In that instant, Salma realized something important. True revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about proving them wrong with dignity and success. Her life transformed completely. With her new income, she moved her mother into a small but comfortable home. She bought her proper treatment, clean clothes, and food that wasn't rationed. For the first time, their home was filled with laughter instead of worry. But Salma didn't stop there. She founded a scholarship program in her mother's name, the Bano Foundation, dedicated to helping poor children get the education they deserved. Each time she awarded a scholarship, she saw herself in their hopeful eyes. She was no longer just living her dream. She was building dreams for others. At the opening ceremony of her foundation, Salma gave a short speech. Her voice was steady, her words simple but powerful. I was once a girl who studied under the flicker of a weak lamp, mocked for being a maid's daughter. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that no one's worth is defined by poverty. To every child out there struggling, remember this: your pain can be your power. The audience stood and clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Among them, her mother smiled proudly, whispering, "That's my daughter." And so Salma's journey came full circle. She had risen from the ashes of hardship, turned humiliation into strength, and carved a legacy that would outlive her. The maid's daughter had become a beacon of hope.